Hey guys, tonight we sail back, way back, to the rocky shoreline of the ancient Levant, where the air smells faintly of brine, cedar, and warm stone. You're standing there now, sandals half buried in sand the color of sun-baked pottery. The faint splash of oars reaches your ears as a long and narrow ship pushes off from the harbor of Tyre. Its hull glimmers with fresh pitch, and a sail dyed a deep, improbable purple catches the late afternoon breeze. You can almost feel the hum of centuries beneath your feet, the quiet, restless energy of merchants who once ruled the waves with cargo, not conquest. You probably wouldn't survive a week on one of these voyages, between the storms, the pirates, and the questionable food storage, but that's fine. Tonight, you're just here to drift and listen. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're on the shores of ancient Phoenicia, a narrow strip of land squeezed between rugged mountains and the glittering Mediterranean Sea. The people here, seafarers, artisans, traders, call themselves Canaanites, though the Greeks will later dub them Phoenicians, meaning purple people, for the vivid dye that made them famous. The sea stretches before you like a promise. Behind you rise cedar-covered hills, where woodcutters shout as they fell ancient trees, some so large they could frame the roofs of temples. Tyre and Sidon are bustling hives of sound. The hammering of bronze, the hiss of boiling dye vats, the laughter of sailors arguing over who gets the last amphora of wine before departure. Children chase each other along the docks, dodging fishmongers and the occasional cranky goat. Even this late in the evening, ships still come and go. Small ones carrying figs and olives to nearby ports, and great broad-bellied merchant ships that will vanish for months across the horizon. The Phoenicians weren't a single empire, but a loose network of city-states, independent, self-governing, and fiercely competitive. Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, Arwad all shared a language and culture, but rarely agreed on politics. Still, they united in their devotion to trade. Wealth flowed through these harbors like tidewater, carrying cedarwood, glass, ivory, and that luxurious Tyrian purple. It was this openness to the sea that made the Phoenicians legendary. As you walk the pier, the smell of tar and salt clings to the air. You pass a group of sailors repairing nets, their fingers deftly weaving hemp cords as they hum an old tune. One man grins and tells you that the nets double as hammocks when they're too tired to stand watch. You nod, pretending to understand the joke, though you catch only half the words. Language here is fluid. Traders learn enough Egyptian to haggle, enough Greek to curse, and enough gestures to close any deal. The harbor master squints toward the horizon where the sun sinks, a molten coin sliding into the water. He's been doing this for decades, memorizing the shapes of ships the way others remember faces. That one's from Cyprus, he mutters, pointing at a two-masted vessel gliding closer. Brings copper, most likely. Always copper. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians were primarily merchants or opportunistic middlemen. Did they build empires of their own, or simply profit from everyone else's ambitions? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. They didn't conquer, they connected. A quirky tidbit for you, legend says the city of Tyre was founded when Melkart, the city's patron god, shot a flaming arrow into the sea, and the spot where it landed rose into an island. The early settlers supposedly built walls right on that rocky platform, defying both waves and reason. Centuries later, Alexander the Great would spend months building a causeway just to reach it, proof that the Phoenicians really did pick the most inconvenient, defensible real estate possible. Night deepens. You wander through narrow alleys lit by oil lamps. Merchants tally ledgers etched on bits of wax, and you catch snippets of conversation about the latest cargo. 60 jars of olive oil from Byblos, 12 crates of glass beads, 3 amphorae of purple dye. Don't spill that one. Someone laughs about a shipment of amphorae that arrived filled with seawater because a sailor forgot to seal them properly. You can tell these people live half in jokes and half in logistics. The purple dye, the lifeblood of Phoenician wealth, comes from the crushed shells of myrick snails. It takes thousands of them to make even a small vial, and the process, well, let's just say it's not something you'd want near your bedroom. The smell of rotting shellfish lingers for weeks. But when that dye sets into fabric, it glows like deep twilight, a color so rich that kings and queens across the Mediterranean demanded it. Somewhere, a worker stirs a vat, and that sharp tang cuts through the night air. You pause to look out over the water again. Lanterns swing on the masts of anchored ships, reflections trembling on the waves. There's a rhythm to this place, the sound of hammers, the creak of ropes, the distant call of a gull. You could almost fall asleep to it, if not for the occasional crash of waves against the breakwater, or the laughter of sailors who've clearly had too much palm wine. As you stroll along the docks, you overhear a pair of traders discussing the next voyage. West to Cyprus first, then Crete, one says, tracing the route with his finger on the damp wood of a crate. We'll hug the coast, safer that way. No one sails blind into the open sea unless they've lost their mind or their cargo. The other laughs and replies, or both. You smile. Even 3,000 years ago, the rules of travel anxiety were alive and well. Farther inland, beyond the warehouses and temples, rise the great cedar forests of Lebanon, the very trees that gave the region its wealth. The trunks are straight, tall, and resin-scented, perfect for building ships and palaces. These trees were prized even by Egypt's pharaohs, who couldn't grow such timber in their own dry lands. Soon enough, your journey will take you there, sailing south along the African coast. But for now, you remain here, among the Phoenicians as they prepare their ships under a sky blooming with stars. You spot a young apprentice carrying a jar of fresh pitch toward the shipyards. He stops to stare out at the sea, perhaps wondering where the ships go, what wonders lie beyond that faint horizon line. You might wonder the same thing. The Mediterranean, after all, isn't a boundary for the Phoenicians, it's a bridge. The rhythmic beat of a drum, sailors pulling on thick ropes as the ship's sail unfurls. The purple cloth catches moonlight, glowing faintly like the belly of some great sea creature. Voices rise, chants in time with the drum, and slowly the vessel slides away from the pier. The wind swells. The scent of cedar and salt lingers in its wake. You take a deep breath, and the night seems to hum softly around you. The waves whisper something ancient and untranslatable. And as you turn to follow the departing ship in your mind's eye, the next chapter of this long, peaceful voyage begins, following the trade that turned a small coastal people into the great merchants of the ancient world. You rise early, long before the sun crests the ridges of Mount Lebanon. The harbor still sleeps, blanketed in mist that smells faintly of brine and cedar sap. Somewhere, a rooster crows, probably regretting its life choices. And from a nearby wharf, you hear the low groan of oxen hauling something heavy. You follow the sound until you reach the edge of the city, where wagons creak down a slope thick with sawdust. Massive cedar trunks, straight, pale, and fragrant, lie stacked like sleeping giants. These trees are the pride of the Phoenicians, their greatest export before the world discovered their obsession with purple dye. Workers move through the haze, their tunics darkened by sweat. The air is cool, but cedar resin clings to everything: hands, hair, even the folds of your cloak. A foreman, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over saws, points to a freshly cut beam and says, "That one's bound for Egypt. They build tombs taller than mountains there, and somehow still need our wood." You nod, wondering how much of the pharaoh's glory actually floated in from this coast. Cedar, after all, is more than timber. It's prestige, religion, and practicality rolled into one. It resists rot, repels insects, and smells good enough to double as an ancient air freshener. Kings across Mesopotamia and Egypt demanded it for their temples, ships, and palaces. Even the great epic of Gilgamesh mentions cedar forests as a sacred place, guarded by divine beasts. The Phoenicians, practical as ever, just saw lumber with excellent grain. You trail behind a cart heading toward the docks. Each trunk is dragged to the shore, where shipwrights measure and saw, stacking beams like puzzle pieces. The sound of adzes biting into wood fills the air. Everywhere you look, cedar dust glows in the slanted light like powdered gold. But the real treasure lies not in the wood, it lies in the shells. Down the shoreline, beyond the carpenters, you reach the dye workshops of Tyre. Even before you see them, you smell them. Let's be honest, it's awful. The stench hits like a slap, sharp, fishy, and faintly chemical. You wrinkle your nose and think, ah, yes, the sweet scent of ancient luxury. Here, workers squat beside heaps of murex shells, each no bigger than a thumbnail. They crack them open carefully, prying out a tiny gland filled with a milky fluid. That's the source of Tyrian purple. A single drop is placed in a shallow basin to dry under the sun. Slowly, the pale liquid darkens, from white to yellow, then green, then a deep reddish violet. It's alchemy without the drama, just patience, sunlight, and a tolerance for terrible smells. This dye was so valuable that at one point it was literally worth its weight in silver. Only royalty could afford to wear it. Roman emperors, centuries later, would make laws forbidding anyone else from donning purple robes. And it all started here, with fishermen, clay pots, and an industrial-scale stink no candle could disguise. One worker waves you over proudly. He holds up a strip of linen dripping with purple liquid. "For the king of Sidon," he says. Or maybe his cousin. They both think they're the king. You can't tell if he's joking, but given Phoenician politics, he's probably not. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians discovered the dye by accident or through meticulous experimentation. One story claims a dog belonging to the god Melkart bit into a sea snail and stained its mouth purple. Another version says a washerwoman noticed that discarded shells near the shore turned her garments red. Either way, it seems divine inspiration and laundry mishaps played equal parts in ancient innovation. You wander further inland, past vats steaming gently in the morning light. The workers hum tunelessly as they stir the brew, using long wooden paddles. The dye clings to their hands permanently. Even their fingernails shimmer faintly violet. It's not glamorous work, but these are the people who give color to empires. Past the workshops, merchants prepare bolts of dyed cloth for shipment. The fabric, once white, now gleams with a depth of color that seems to shift between crimson and indigo depending on the light. A trader runs his fingers over the cloth and smiles with satisfaction. "Worth 3 camels," he murmurs. "Maybe 4 if the buyer has bad eyesight." You can't help but grin. Some things, salesmanship for example, haven't changed much in 3,000 years. You pause near a warehouse where artisans mix other trade goods. Glass beads from Sidon, carved ivory from African traders, and bronze trinkets imported from the Aegean. The smell of cedar mingles with metal and spice. A woman sits cross-legged beside a low table, painting tiny motifs on pottery, ships, waves, and stylized fish. She looks up briefly and says, "You know, sometimes I think the sea paints us back." It's a poetic thought, and for a moment, you just listen to the sound of the brushes and the distant surf. A quirky tidbit for you: the Phoenicians were also expert perfumers. Archaeologists found ancient perfume bottles shaped like tiny animals, gazelles, birds, even little fish, sealed with wax and filled with scented oil. Imagine opening one after a long sea voyage. Cedarwood, myrrh, and olive oil blending into something that almost masks the smell of murex. Almost. By midday, the harbor transforms again. Ships groan as cargo is loaded, crates of wood, jars of oil, and tightly rolled bales of purple fabric bound for Crete, Egypt, and beyond. Sailors move quickly, shouting in several languages at once. You catch a few words of Egyptian, a splash of Greek, and even a phrase from some traveler out west. The Phoenician coast is a crossroads, and everyone who lands here leaves changed. Near the edge of the dock, a scribe records each shipment on a clay tablet. You watch as he scratches tiny marks into the surface, Phoenician letters, neat and precise. Later, that tablet will dry in the sun and travel with the cargo as proof of trade. It's remarkable how these symbols, simple lines and angles, will one day give birth to alphabets used across half the world. But that's a story for later. For now, it's just accounting. A gust of wind catches your hair, and you taste salt on your lips. The first ships are ready to depart. The captain of one vessel, a tall man with a beard the color of driftwood, gives a shout. Sailors push the ship off its wooden cradle, the hull sliding smoothly into the sea. The water foams around it, gleaming like liquid glass. The ship rocks gently as it settles. The crew checks the rigging, adjusts the sail, and tests the oars. A priest appears briefly on the dock, tossing a small offering, a handful of barley and a splash of wine into the water. "For Melkart," he mutters, "and for safe winds." The sailors nod, superstition and practicality blending in quiet agreement. As the ship drifts away, its hull gleams faintly purple from the fresh dye that splattered during loading. You can't help noticing the symbolism: wood from the mountains, dye from the sea, and human hands binding it all together. The Phoenicians have turned their geography, this narrow, rocky coastline, into a launch pad for influence. The air grows warm, cicadas singing from the nearby cliffs. You wander along the now quiet docks. The scent of resin and salt lingers, mingling with faint traces of smoke from cooking fires. Somewhere, a child chases a crab across the sand, shrieking with laughter. For a moment, you forget the noise of trade and think only of how peaceful the waves sound, lapping steadily, patiently, like a heartbeat. As twilight approaches, the last of the cargo is stowed. The workers pack up their tools and head home, their feet leaving deep prints in the damp sand. Behind them, the cedar logs, purple cloth, and ivory trinkets lie waiting for the next ship, a quiet promise that tomorrow will look much like today. You glance west, where the horizon blurs into gold and violet. A thin line of sails cuts across the sea, shrinking toward the edge of sight. Each one carries not just goods, but stories of forest and sea, of dye vats and timber yards, of people who turned everyday labor into something close to legend. And as the last light fades, you realize the Phoenicians didn't just trade in materials, they traded in connections. Every log, every shell, every shimmering scrap of fabric carried a piece of this coast with it, a scent, a sound, a color. And somewhere out there, across the waves, another harbor waits to receive it. The next morning, the shipyards of Sidon wake before the city does. You follow the faint glow of dawn toward the smell of salt and sawdust. The sound of hammers tapping against wood echoes rhythmically, like a heartbeat guiding the harbor to life. It's hypnotic. Tap, pause, scrape, tap again. You pass through a row of half-built ships, each resting on wooden cradles that creak slightly as men climb aboard with chisels and adzes. Somewhere nearby, someone curses softly after dropping a nail into the sand. The sea swallows the sound, patient and amused. Here, in these open-air workshops, the shipbuilders of Phoenicia shape the very bones of their civilization. You walk between long, slender hulls, their ribs exposed like the skeletons of giant fish. The builders move with calm precision, measuring with knotted cords instead of rulers. Their tools are simple, mallets, saws, and blades polished by years of use, but their skill borders on magic. A carpenter with arms thick as tree trunks catches your eye. He gestures to a pile of cedar planks and says, "Wood's gotta be alive even when it's dead. You bend it too fast, she'll crack. Let it think it's winning." You smile, unsure whether he's joking or speaking ancient wisdom. Possibly both. He dips one plank into a long trough of steaming seawater, waiting until the fibers soften. Then, slowly, carefully, he bends it along the frame, humming under his breath. The song sounds old enough to have been sung when the first sail touched the sea. Phoenician shipwrights revolutionized naval design. They created the first true cargo ships, sturdy and wide-bellied, capable of carrying tons of goods over vast distances. Their warships, by contrast, were sleek and fast, precursors to later Greek triremes. Archaeologists have found carvings showing Phoenician ships with horsehead prows, curved elegantly to cut through the waves. The Greeks, impressed as always, borrowed both the ships and the mythic style. Nearby, an apprentice sands the curved hull of a small boat, sweat streaking his forehead. He's too young to have sailed yet, but he dreams about it, about seeing Cyprus, Crete, maybe even Egypt. You ask what he's most afraid of, expecting storms or pirates. Instead, he says, running out of stories. You blink, he grins. Old sailors say the sea gets angry if you've got nothing new to tell it. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians invented the keel, that central spine that keeps ships stable in rough waters. Some credit them with refining it rather than creating it, but either way, their designs set the standard for centuries. Without their innovations, later navies, from Greece to Rome, would have been far less seaworthy. Every plank nailed here is a note in the long song of maritime history. You crouch beside a half-finished galley. The builders coat the hull with a layer of dark pitch, sealing every joint against leaks. The smell of tar and burning resin is sharp but comforting, like campfire smoke mixed with ocean air. One man smears pitch along the seams with bare hands, his fingers blackened to the wrist. He looks up at you and says, "Don't worry, it never washes off, even in the next life." Then he laughs, showing teeth stained purple from last night's wine. At the edge of the shipyard, ropes hang from tall poles, drying in the breeze. The fibers, twisted from flax and palm, sway like seaweed. You run your hand over one. It's rough, oily, and surprisingly warm from the sun. A group of women sit nearby, plaiting rope and repairing sailcloth. One calls out, "Don't touch unless you're planning to help." You retreat gracefully. Beyond them, a small shrine sits beneath an overhang of rock. It's dedicated to Yam, the god of the sea, though someone scrawled Melkart's symbol beside it too, an insurance policy perhaps. Offerings cluster at its base, shells, coins, a few figs, and what looks suspiciously like a broken oar. A sailor approaches, murmuring a short prayer before flicking seawater from his fingertips toward the shrine. You notice his bracelet, carved from whalebone. Keeps the waves from getting jealous, he explains. Ancient Phoenician sailors were rumored to train with carrier pigeons long before others did. They'd release them mid-voyage, and if the birds returned home, the sailors knew they were still roughly on course. It was an early GPS, except with more cooing and occasional droppings. Historians debate how widespread the practice was, but it fits perfectly with the Phoenicians' blend of practicality and superstition. You step aboard a newly finished ship, still moored at the dock. The deck smells of fresh wood, and the faint sway beneath your feet feels alive. The captain, a sun-darkened man with a gold earring shaped like a fish, shows you around proudly. 30 cubits long, he says, tapping the rail. carries 50 amphorae of oil and room for more. She'll ride the sea like a dolphin. You nod, even though you're quietly thinking that dolphins probably wouldn't appreciate being compared to freight carriers. He gestures to the prow, where artisans carve intricate patterns, spirals, waves, and small figures of sea creatures. Each one keeps a story, he explains. A fish for good winds, a spiral for returning home, a bird for the message you send when you don't. You trace your fingers over the carvings. The texture is rough, but full of meaning. This isn't decoration, it's conversation with the sea. As the day warms, you follow the shipbuilders to a nearby inlet where completed vessels are launched. It's a ritual as much as a task. They smear oil and wine along the hull for luck, then chant in rhythm as ropes are loosened. The ship slides forward with a groan, wood against wood, and splashes into the water. A cheer rises from the crowd. For a moment, everyone stops, watching the new creation float, steady and sure. There's a quiet pride here, but also humility. Every ship is a gamble. Even the best designed can't outthink a storm. And yet, the Phoenicians keep building, keep sailing, as if the ocean itself were a business partner who sometimes just needs to be reminded who's in charge. As you walk back through the shipyard, the scent of cedar deepens under the midday sun. It's a smell you'll start to associate with resilience, the kind of strength that bends but doesn't break. Workers eat their lunch beneath the hulls, shaded by their own craftsmanship. One man picks at a loaf of bread and says, "Ships are like people. You spend your whole life patching leaks and hoping the wind stays kind." You can't argue with that.
Later, the air cools. The shipwrights clean their tools and hang them carefully along the racks. Children sneak in to play among the skeletons of half-built boats, pretending to sail them to lands they can't yet imagine. The laughter echoes against the hulls like the sound of waves slapping gently against the shore. You glance toward the horizon, where finished ships rock at anchor, rows of them, their purple sails catching the last light. Each one represents hundreds of hours of labor, hundreds of hands, and hundreds of hopes tied up in hemp rope and cedar planks. The sea looks calm now, almost kind, but you know better. It's watching, waiting, measuring.
A thin breeze curls around your face. Somewhere behind you, the carpenter from earlier calls out, "She's ready!" You turn to see him patting the side of a completed vessel with affection. "Strong enough to outrun pirates, light enough to race a gull," he says proudly. You can't help but admire his confidence. As the sun sets, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples, you realize that these sounds, these smells, these rituals, is where the Phoenicians' true genius lives. Not just in what they traded, but in how they built the means to trade it. Every plank they shape and every knot they tie is another line written in the story of human movement. You take one last look at the shipyard, now glowing softly under the fading light. The waves lap against the dock, whispering secrets in a language older than words. And as the stars appear, you sense that the ships moored here are already dreaming of their next voyage, out toward the copper-rich islands of the Aegean, where the scent of cedar will mingle with something new. The morning tide pulls you westward, past the breakwaters of Tyre and into open water. The ship rocks gently beneath your feet, its oars dipping in and out of the sea in a rhythm as steady as breathing. You stand near the prow, feeling spray kiss your face, watching the faint outline of the coast fade behind you. Ahead lies open sea, a wide expanse of blue-green that glitters like broken glass in the sun. Somewhere beyond that shimmer waits Cyprus, the island of copper. The crew moves with quiet efficiency. Each man knows his role. One tightens the ropes, another adjusts the sail. Another hums to himself while polishing a bronze hook that could probably double as a weapon if things got messy. The ship's purple sail bellies out under the wind, carrying the scent of cedar, oil, and a faint trace of home. You can almost hear the timbers creak with satisfaction. Finally, movement after weeks of waiting in the dockyards. Phoenician ships hug the coastline whenever possible. Deep-sea navigation is risky, and the men here trust the stars and shorelines more than any compass. You can see why. To the north, jagged mountains rise from the mist. To the south, the endless sea glints with unpredictable light. You pass small fishing boats from local villages, their crews waving lazily as they haul in morning catches. A child on one of the boats shouts something in a dialect you don't recognize, probably a friendly insult about your oversized sail. You wave back anyway. The captain, leaning casually on the tiller, explains that Phoenician merchants rarely traveled alone. Trade meant safety, but safety meant numbers. Convoys of ships would sometimes journey together, forming what looked like a floating marketplace. One ship carried timber, another carried dye, another amphorae of oil or grain. If a storm struck, they could help each other. If pirates appeared, well, there's strength in numbers, and more importantly, there's someone slower than you to outrun. A mainstream historical fact, Cyprus was one of the Phoenicians' earliest and most important trade partners. Its copper mines had been famous since the Bronze Age, so much so that the very word copper in Latin, cuprum, comes from Cyprium metal, meaning metal from Cyprus. The Phoenicians brought cedar and crafts to the island and returned with heavy ingots and raw ore. Bronze, the foundation of ancient tools and weapons, depended on this connection. Without Cyprus, the Bronze Age would have been, well, a lot less bronze. By midday, the island appears as a faint line on the horizon, soft, green, and shimmering under the haze. The crew cheers quietly. They've been at sea for 2 days, sleeping in turns under rough blankets. The captain grins. You see that curve? That's Salamis. Good harbor, bad taverns. He chuckles, and the sailors nod knowingly, as if every port in the Mediterranean shares that exact ratio. As the ship nears the shore, you see the landscape unfold. Terraced hills dotted with olive trees, small villages hugging the coastline, and the distant gleam of copper smelting fires. The air smells faintly metallic, like warm stone and coin. The harbor bustles with activity. Greek traders, local miners, Egyptian envoys, and Phoenicians like yourselves unloading cargo with practiced grace. A few men from the island greet your captain with clasped arms and broad smiles. They wear tunics streaked with red dust, the telltale sign of copper mining. You've brought the wood? One asks. The captain nods toward the stacked cedar beams. And you've got the metal? He replies. Business begins instantly. No speeches, no small talk, just the ancient language of trade. Weight, value, and trust. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians had formal colonies on Cyprus or merely trading enclaves. Some evidence suggests they settled there permanently, blending with local populations. Others think they preferred to keep their roots shallow, setting up shop just long enough to make a profit. Either way, Cyprus became a bridge, a place where the cultures of East and West shook hands over ledgers and amphorae. While the men haggle, you wander through the harbor market. Bronze tools glint on tables, chisels, blades, and figurines shaped like bulls and birds. A woman sells jars of honey so thick it moves like molten gold. Another trader displays fragments of pottery painted with swirling patterns you recognize from Crete. He sees your interest and says, "Brought by ship from Knossos. Fine work, lasts forever if you don't drop it." You nod politely and take a step back, just in case. You pause near a group of potters who sit cross-legged beside their wheels. Their hands move with mesmerizing speed, shaping clay into elegant amphorae. They'll sell them empty today, but by tomorrow, Phoenicians will fill them with oil or wine and send them back across the sea. Even the pottery itself becomes part of trade, vessels as valuable as the goods they carry. A quirky tidbit: some archaeologists believe Phoenician traders secretly carried small stashes of dye or glass beads, even when they claimed to be hauling timber or grain. These bonus items were used for quiet bribes or quick exchanges with locals who preferred shiny trinkets to formal currency. Imagine a sailor sidling up to a Cypriot miner and saying, "Nice ore you've got. How about a necklace for your wife in exchange for a slightly bigger chunk?" Business and charm, two sides of the same coin. As afternoon light softens, the captain invites you to join a short trip inland. You follow a winding path past olive groves and into the hills where copper ore gleams like dull red veins in the stone. Workers chip away at the rock with simple tools, their arms and faces streaked with dust. The air hums with heat and the occasional clang of metal. It's not glamorous, but the energy here feels ancient and industrious. These are the hands that built civilizations, one hammer blow at a time. You crouch beside a miner who's sorting through stones. He holds one up for you to see. Greenish, speckled, heavy. Malachite, he says, the good kind. The mountain gives it freely when she's in a good mood. He drops it into a basket with a dozen others. You notice he wears a small charm around his neck, a seashell from Tyre, polished smooth. Even here, far from the water, the connection to the Phoenician coast remains strong. By the time you return to the harbor, the sky burns orange. Ships bob gently in the bay, and the smell of roasting fish drifts from nearby stalls. Sailors sit around small fires, trading stories as readily as they traded goods. One man gestures animatedly while describing a storm that supposedly lifted his ship clear out of the water. Another swears he saw a whale larger than a temple somewhere near Rhodes. You can't tell which tales are true and which are just saltwater exaggerations, but honestly, it doesn't matter. The sea always blurs the line between reality and myth. The captain joins the group, handing around a jug of wine. He leans back against a crate and sighs contentedly. "Every voyage, we say we'll stop after this one," he tells you, smiling faintly. "And every time, we load the ship again. The sea keeps calling." You ask him what he thinks it's saying. He shrugs. Probably something like, "Don't get comfortable." As night falls, lanterns bloom along the harbor like small golden stars. The reflection of firelight on water shimmers softly, and the air cools just enough to carry the sound of distant waves. You sit quietly, listening to the creak of ropes and the soft murmur of traders still arguing over prices. The Phoenicians have found their rhythm here, between sea and shore, commerce and kinship. Tomorrow, you'll leave Cyprus behind and sail farther west to the islands of the Aegean, where bronze and myth intermingle, and where the sea becomes both road and rival. But for now, you rest beside the dock, lulled by the same sounds that have rocked sailors to sleep for millennia. Wood against wood, wave against hull, and the faint whisper of a breeze that smells of copper and salt. The dawn comes slow and golden over the sea, spilling light like melted amber across the deck. You awaken to the sound of ropes being drawn, sails being raised, and the soft murmurs of sailors preparing for departure. The ship is turning south now, toward the great river civilization of Egypt, where cedar and resin are worth their weight in gold. You can almost smell the desert air waiting far beyond the horizon. The Phoenicians knew these waters well. Generations of captains had followed the same sunlit routes, moving along the Levantine coast before veering toward the Nile Delta. Egypt was both customer and rival, a land so rich in grain, gold, and papyrus that even its dust seemed valuable. The Egyptians needed timber for their temples and ships, and the Phoenicians, whose mountains grew thick with cedar, were more than happy to oblige. As the coastline stretches away, the sea darkens into deeper hues of blue. The sailors navigate with instinct, using the position of the sun, the color of the water, and the flight of seabirds as their guides. One old sailor leans against the mast, his eyes squinting into the wind. "You can always tell when Egypt's near," he says. "The air smells of river mud before you ever see land." By midday, his words prove true. The horizon blurs with a pale haze, and the wind carries a strange, earthy scent, part salt, part silt, and faintly sweet. Soon, the first delta reeds come into view, swaying in slow rhythm along the water's edge. You can hear birdsong, the flapping of wings, and the low hum of insects rising from the wetlands. It feels as if the world itself exhales after holding its breath across the sea. The ship glides gently into a broad channel where the water turns the color of old coins. Small Egyptian boats drift past, slender, papyrus-thin vessels propelled by poles and oars. Their crews wear white linen and wide smiles, calling out in a mixture of greetings and jokes. Trade has made everyone here a little multilingual. Your captain shouts back a few words of Egyptian, and laughter answers across the water. The harbor of the Nile Delta is unlike any you've seen. Instead of rocky coasts, it's a maze of water and earth, marshy islands, half-sunken docks, and long wooden piers reaching into the current. Palm trees lean over the banks, and between them rise clusters of warehouses, huts, and market stalls covered with woven mats. The air smells of fish, incense, and something faintly metallic, bronze tools catching the sun. You disembark with the crew, your feet sinking slightly into the damp ground. Egyptian port officials meet the traders with practiced ceremony. Tall men wearing shaved heads, linen kilts, and wide collars of colored beads. One holds a writing board of papyrus and stylus. He begins listing the goods as they're unloaded: cedar beams, amphorae of oil, jars of dye, glass ornaments, and bolts of fine linen dyed purple. Each item is measured, recorded, and stamped with a small clay seal. The process is slow but methodical. The Egyptians love records. They document everything: cargo, payment, names of ships, even the direction of the wind that day. You find yourself fascinated by the scribes, how their reed pens dance across papyrus with quiet grace, leaving elegant curls of hieroglyphs behind. Each symbol seems alive, half picture and half word. A local scribe notices your curiosity and smiles. "The pen remembers what the tongue forgets," he says softly. You nod, watching the ink glisten in the sun. Perhaps this is why the Phoenicians admired Egyptian wisdom so deeply. They were merchants of matter, wood, metal, dye. But Egypt traded in something subtler: knowledge. Once the formalities end, trade begins in earnest. Egyptian merchants arrive from inland cities, their boats stacked with grain, gold ornaments, and woven cloth. The Phoenicians unroll bolts of dyed fabric so vivid they almost glow in the light. The Egyptians gasp quietly. Purple, the color of royalty, was rare and precious here. You see deals being struck in low voices and quick gestures, each transaction sealed with a smile and a nod. Cedarwood, in particular, draws eager buyers. Egypt's native trees are small and brittle, good for firewood, but not for building the grand ships that sail the Nile or the colossal doors of temples. Phoenician cedar, strong and fragrant, is treated almost as sacred material. Priests commission it for shrines. Shipwrights use it to craft river barges that glide like shadows across the water. The captain whispers to you, "They'll pay in grain this season. The harvest was good. You can feed a city with one cargo like this." By afternoon, the marketplace swells with sound. Drummers beat steady rhythms. Children chase each other between rows of pottery. Women barter for spices and cosmetics. The air ripples with warmth and laughter. A breeze drifts through, carrying the distant scent of lotus flowers from the riverbanks. You wander among the stalls. One sells polished alabaster jars, another gleaming copper mirrors. A third displays perfume sealed in slender glass vials, Phoenician glass perhaps, now transformed and resold. The mingling of cultures feels seamless here. Goods from Tyre, Byblus, Crete, and Memphis all sit side by side, as though the world were a single vast bazaar. In the evening, you follow the river upstream with a few sailors and an Egyptian guide. The small boat moves slowly against the current, papyrus reeds brushing against its sides. The guide points out landmarks. That way is Tanis, home of the silversmiths. Beyond it, Bubastis, city of the cat goddess. And farther still, Memphis, the heart of the Old Kingdom. His voice softens reverently as he speaks the last name, as though the city itself listens. When the sun dips low, the world turns gold. The Nile reflects the sky so perfectly that you can't tell where water ends and air begins. Birds settle into the reeds, their wings flashing white before vanishing into shadow. You pass fishermen hauling nets heavy with silver-scaled catches. They sing to the rhythm of their work, low and soothing, a song older than any empire. The guide offers you a handful of dates and a small clay cup filled with beer, thick, sweet, and slightly grainy. Bread you can drink, he jokes. You taste it, and it's surprisingly pleasant. Around you, the river hums softly, carrying whispers of markets, temples, and unseen cities farther inland. That night, the Phoenician traders are invited to a small feast near the docks. Clay lamps flicker along the riverbank, and the reflection of fire dances on the water. Egyptians and Phoenicians sit side by side, eating bread, roasted fish, figs, and lentils. A musician plucks at a harp while another beats a hand drum in slow rhythm. The captain leans back, eyes half closed, content. You notice an Egyptian merchant examining a Phoenician amphora by lamplight. He runs his hand over the glass, marveling at its smoothness. "We shape stone," he says, "but you shape light." The Phoenician laughs quietly. "Light sells better than stone," he replies. Later, as the music fades, you walk alone along the shore. The moon rises over the delta, silvering the reeds and the river alike. You hear the gentle hiss of water against sand and the faint murmur of the crew sleeping nearby. The Nile glows like a long living vein, carrying life, memory, and trade through the desert. You realize that for the Phoenicians, this place is more than a destination. It's a mirror. Egypt, like them, thrives on exchange between land and sea, past and present, earth and spirit. You stand quietly, listening to the river's slow pulse. Somewhere far upstream, temple bells ring, carried faintly on the wind. The sound mingles with the lapping of waves, a harmony of civilization and nature. When dawn returns, you'll set sail again, this time westward, toward new colonies and uncharted waters. But a part of you will stay here, among the reeds and golden light, where the river meets the sea, and history whispers through every grain of silt. The morning air feels soft against your face as you stand on deck, watching the Nile Delta shrink into a watercolor blur of green and gold. The ship creaks gently as ropes tighten and sails unfurl. The sailors work quietly, each movement efficient, practiced, almost ritualistic. You can smell the faint tang of pitch, the dry sweetness of cedar, and the promise of open sea. It's time to leave Egypt behind and follow the setting sun toward the far western edges of the world. The Phoenicians were no strangers to long voyages. For centuries, they had pushed their slender ships farther than anyone thought sensible, chasing trade and curiosity in equal measure. You can imagine their maps, rough sketches inked on scraps of parchment, marked not with precise coastlines, but with stories. Here, the water boils, or there, the sea ends. To them, geography was a song, passed from sailor to sailor, verse by verse. The first few days at sea are calm. The Mediterranean stretches smooth and endless, a sheet of shimmering blue glass. Flying fish skim the surface, and seabirds wheel lazily overhead. The crew moves in rhythm, rowing, singing, adjusting the sail to catch the faintest breath of wind. The captain, a sunburned man with salt crusting his beard, keeps one hand on the tiller and the other on a small carved amulet of Melkart, god of the sea and protector of travelers. Never leave home without him, he jokes, though the way he touches the charm each morning suggests otherwise. As the coast fades into the distance, a quiet settles over the ship. Days blur together: sunrise, wind, water, sleep. You start to understand how the Phoenicians lived half their lives between horizons. The sea becomes both home and adversary, beautiful and unpredictable. One moment, the water lies still as polished bronze. The next, it rises in restless swells that make the deck groan and the stomach lurch. On calmer days, the sailors repair nets, polish bronze fittings, or carve small charms from bits of driftwood. One young man shows you his, an amulet shaped like a fish, meant to bring luck and calm weather. "My mother made it," he says. "She swore the sea listens to small gifts." You nod, deciding it's probably wise not to argue with anyone's mother, ancient or otherwise. At night, the stars emerge, bright and countless. The crew uses them like old friends, naming constellations in a mixture of Phoenician and Greek. The North Star becomes their compass, the moon their clock. The helmsman murmurs to himself, counting the time between waves, judging the ship's course by rhythm rather than sight. The sea hums in reply, a vast, steady heartbeat beneath the wood. By the fifth day, you begin to notice subtle changes in the water's color and scent. The air grows cooler, carrying a hint of minerals and faraway forests. The captain leans over the rail, squinting westward. "We'll see Cyprus soon," he says. "We'll stop there before turning toward Crete. Can't trust the wind beyond these waters." Cyprus rises from the sea like a green mirage, a rugged island dotted with olive trees, vineyards, and copper mines. The harbor smells of smoke and fresh bread, and the hills shimmer with heat. The Phoenicians have traded here for generations. They come for copper, the island's lifeblood, and leave behind fine textiles, glass, and cedar. You can see evidence of their influence everywhere: carved letters on stone warehouses, familiar symbols painted on amphorae, even a small shrine to Astarte near the shore. While the crew loads fresh water and supplies, you explore the market. It's a chaos of voices, colors, and scents. Smoke from roasting meat, piles of figs, copper ingots stacked in neat pyramids. Traders argue cheerfully over prices, while children dart between the stalls, trying to snatch falling fruit. The local merchants know the Phoenicians well. Deals are struck quickly, sealed with a clap of hands and a shared cup of wine. A mainstream historical fact: Cyprus was a key hub in the Phoenician trade network, both a source of raw copper and a midpoint between East and West. The island's proximity to the Levant made it a natural extension of Phoenician influence. Archaeologists still uncover inscriptions in the Phoenician alphabet here, proof of a long and steady presence. A quirky tidbit? Some sailors swore the island's mountains sang at night when the wind swept through their copper-rich caves. More likely, it was the echo of the sea in the hollows, but it's a comforting thought that the land itself hums a lullaby for travelers. Historians still argue whether Cyprus was a colony, a partner, or something in between. The truth, as always, is complicated. The Phoenicians rarely conquered. They preferred contracts to armies. But their presence ran deep, woven into language, art, and trade routes that outlasted kings. As the ship departs Cyprus, you notice the sailors perform a small ritual. They toss fragments of bread and wine into the sea. A gift to appease the gods, or perhaps just to mark the end of a safe stay. The captain smiles at your puzzled look. "It's payment," he says, "for safe passage so far." The next stretch of the voyage is rougher. The wind picks up from the northwest, and waves slap against the hull with heavy hands. The crew moves with quiet efficiency, tightening ropes and adjusting sails to keep the ship steady. Spray stings your face. The air tastes of salt and rain. The world shrinks to wood, water, and motion. For 2 days, the storm holds you hostage. The sky turns a bruised gray, and lightning flashes over distant waves. The captain shouts orders, his voice half lost in the wind. You cling to the mast, soaked and shivering, wondering if the Phoenicians ever questioned their life choices mid-tempest. Probably not. They were used to this chaos. Still, you silently promise never to complain about airport turbulence again. When the storm finally passes, the sea gleams clean and calm. The air feels fresh, the kind that makes you grateful simply to be breathing. The sailors laugh and slap each other's backs, celebrating survival with mugs of watered wine. One of them fishes a piece of driftwood from the water and nails it to the mast for luck. Poseidon's gift, he jokes, though Melkart might protest the credit. As the ship continues westward, you begin to see distant islands, Crete, then the faint outlines of the Aegean scattered like stepping stones across the water. The Phoenicians trade here too, though the Greeks eye them with equal parts admiration and suspicion. To many, the Phoenicians are mysterious. The people who bring goods from unseen lands, who know the winds as well as the words for every price. The days lengthen again. The wind grows warm, and the sea glows silver under the afternoon sun. You spend evenings listening to sailors tell stories of whales mistaken for islands, of floating temples that drift from port to port, of lost cities swallowed by the sea. None of it is true, probably, but the telling makes the miles pass softer. When night falls, you lie on the deck, staring at the stars. The ship rocks gently beneath you, each wave a slow exhale. The sea glimmers faintly, dotted with sparks of bioluminescence, tiny living lights that pulse in rhythm with the tide. It feels almost alive, as if the ocean itself were breathing you into sleep. The captain walks by, a silhouette against the starlight. "You see that glow?" he says, pointing to the water. "We call it the sea's lantern. It means calm weather tomorrow." You nod, watching the faint green shimmer drift past the hull. He pauses, then adds, "Or it means a giant squid's about to eat us. Hard to say." You laugh softly. The sea always balances awe with absurdity. As dawn breaks again, you realize the Phoenicians didn't just navigate the Mediterranean, they stitched it together. Every port, every island, every distant coast was a bead on their invisible thread of trade. And as the wind fills the sail once more, pushing you west toward lands yet unseen, you understand how that thread held the ancient world together, quietly, patiently, like the tide itself. The days at sea stretch longer now, the horizon endless and inviting. The Phoenicians' ships, built narrow and strong, slice through the rolling blue like cedar knives. You've left the familiar coasts behind. To your right lies the distant curve of Greece. To your left, open sea, shimmering and unknowable. Ahead waits the next great chapter of their story, the founding of far-flung colonies that would become their legacy long after their home ports faded into myth. By the time you reach the shores of North Africa, the air has changed. It smells dry and sweet, like sun-baked clay and crushed herbs. The coastline unfolds in long ochre ridges, broken only by scattered coves where fishermen's huts cluster near the water. Somewhere among these inlets lies a place that will one day be called Carthage, the jewel of Phoenicia's western trade. But tonight, it's just a quiet bay. The moon is low, and the waves lap gently against the sand. You can almost imagine the first settlers stepping ashore, tired, hopeful, carrying jars of oil, bundles of rope, and the smell of cedar still clinging to their clothes. According to legend, it begins with a woman, Queen Elissa, or Dido as the Romans later called her, flees her homeland of Tyre after a bitter struggle with her brother, King Pygmalion. She gathers loyal followers, loads ships with treasures and provisions, and sails west, guided only by faith and stubborn courage. The voyage is long, weeks of wind and hunger and the endless hiss of waves, but she finally arrives here, where the African coast curves like an open palm. The local ruler, wary but curious, offers her as much land as she can cover with a single ox hide. It sounds like an insult until Dido cuts the hide into thin strips and lays them end to end, encircling an entire hill. Clever, precise, and slightly petty. Exactly the kind of intelligence the Phoenicians admired. They build walls on that hill, light fires against the night, and call the place Carthage, the new city. Carthage was indeed founded by settlers from Tyre around the late 9th or early 8th century BCE. Archaeologists have uncovered layers of Phoenician pottery, tools, and religious artifacts that mirror those of their homeland. From this coastal outpost, the Phoenicians could reach Spain, Sardinia, and even the Atlantic coasts beyond Gibraltar. As dawn spreads over the sea, you picture the harbor taking shape. Ships anchored in neat rows, warehouses built of stone and mud brick, markets buzzing with voices. Carthage grows fast, its harbor curved like a crescent moon, protected by breakwaters and guarded by twin watchtowers. The smell of tar, olive oil, and fish soon fills the air, as it did in Tyre and Sidon. Here, though, the colors are different. The earth glows red under the sun, and the hills shimmer with olive groves and fig trees. The settlers adapt quickly, trading cedar for local timber, importing wine and textiles from the east while sending back silver, salt, and grain. The Phoenicians' genius lies in flexibility. They never try to remake a place into Tyre. They let it become its own story, as long as the trade routes stay alive. A quirky tidbit, early Carthaginian coins often bore the image of a horse, an animal sacred to their chief god, Baal-Haman. Some say it symbolized speed and strength. Others whisper it was a nod to the myth that Dido's people first landed where wild horses grazed. Historians still argue whether those early symbols were purely religious or served as subtle political branding. Ancient marketing, you might say. As you walk through the imagined city, you can hear the chatter of merchants setting up stalls. Clay jars line the market tables, filled with honey, spices, and salt. A fisherman shouts about his morning catch, waving a squid the size of a child. Children chase each other through alleys, their laughter echoing against the stone. You stop by a weaver's shop, watching as she dips linen into vats of purple dye, the same pungent color that built the Phoenicians' fortune centuries earlier. The cycle continues, one trade at a time. The new city also inherits old gods. Shrines rise quickly, one to Melkart, guardian of travelers, another to Astarte, goddess of love and war. Offerings of wine and incense burn beside small bronze figurines. At night, the priests walk along the harbor walls carrying torches, their chants blending with the soft crash of waves. You can almost see the glow reflected in the water, tiny suns bobbing in rhythm with the tide. Carthage soon becomes more than a stopover. It's the western anchor of a vast maritime network. Ships arrive from every direction. Wood from Sicily, tin from Spain, ivory from North Africa. The city hums like a living machine. You can picture the docks crowded with sailors unloading amphorae, scribes tallying ledgers on wax tablets, and traders arguing over exchange rates in a mix of Phoenician, Berber, and Greek. At night, after the workday fades, the city changes mood. Lanterns flicker in doorways. Musicians gather near the harbor, playing reed flutes and soft drums. The sound carries out to sea, mingling with the creak of ropes and the sigh of wind in the sails. A sailor tells you that some nights, when the weather's right, You can hear the music miles offshore. "It means you're near home," he says, smiling into the dark. Historians still argue whether Carthage ever truly severed its ties with Tyre. Was it born from exile or simply expansion? Did Dido's people flee tyranny, or were they entrepreneurs seeking fresh markets? The myths blur with the facts, as they often do. But in either version, the sea remains the bridge between them, a shimmering thread of continuity. Over time, the new city begins to outshine the old. Tyre, bound to the east, faces the constant pressure of Assyrian and Babylonian empires, while Carthage thrives in freedom. It builds fleets of swift merchant vessels and later warships that can dominate entire seas. But that, you remind yourself, lies centuries ahead. For now, this is still a peaceful place, a frontier of commerce and optimism. You find yourself walking along the city's new breakwater at dusk. The air hums with the scent of salt and smoke. Far off, the first stars glimmer to life, scattered like coins spilled across the sky. Below, the harbor is a constellation of its own, dozens of small fires glowing from ships and lamps. The voices of sailors rise and fall, half laughter, half lullaby. You pause by a group of builders who are laying the foundations for another warehouse. One gestures with a smile. "Stone lasts," he says, "even after memory fades." You wonder if he could possibly imagine how right he'll be, that long after Tyre's towers crumble, Carthage will carry the torch of Phoenicia into the next age. As you look westward, you can almost sense the pull of farther lands: Sardinia, Malta, Ibiza, and Spain. The Phoenicians will keep moving, each colony a bead along their endless maritime thread. Their map isn't a flat parchment, it's the living sea itself, stitched together by memory, trade, and trust. Before returning to the ship, you glance one last time at the city rising behind you, the fires, the laughter, the smell of cedar smoke curling into the dusk. Carthage isn't just a colony anymore, it's a promise, a declaration that wherever the sea touches, the Phoenicians will leave a mark. And as the tide slides out, drawing your reflection thin and shimmering across the water, you know the voyage isn't ending. It's only turning another page, westward still, toward the edge of the known world. The sea lies calm beneath the morning light as your ship pushes farther west. Carthage fades behind you, its harbors and temples swallowed by distance, but its influence travels with you, carried in every amphora of wine, every cedar plank, every sailor's story whispered between the creak of ropes. The wind fills the sail with a deep, steady sigh, and ahead, the horizon glows faintly bronze. Somewhere beyond that glow lies the Iberian Peninsula, land of mountains, rivers, and silver. The Phoenicians had heard rumors of it for generations. Sailors spoke of a western shore where the earth bled wealth, veins of metal running through cliffs, nuggets of silver gleaming in riverbeds. They called it Tarshish, a name that shows up in old records and even in biblical verses, wrapped in both fact and fable. Historians still argue whether Tarshish was a single city, a region, or simply a dream, a catch-all term for the farthest edge of the world. But for the Phoenicians, the truth didn't matter. If there was silver to be found, they would find it. By midday, the coastline of southern Spain rises from the mist, rugged, sunlit, and wild. The hills shimmer with heat, their slopes dotted with olive trees and pale grasses that wave like slow-moving fire. The water turns from deep blue to green, flecked with foam as it breaks against rocky inlets. Flocks of seabirds circle overhead, their cries sharp and thin. The ship glides into a narrow bay, where the river Guadalquivir, though you wouldn't call it that yet, winds lazily inland. The Phoenicians anchor near the mouth of the river, and the sailors lower small boats to row ashore. The smell of fresh earth replaces the tang of salt as you draw closer to land. It's a landscape that feels young, unspoiled, raw, and promising. Stepping onto the shore, your sandals sink into reddish sand. A few locals, tanned and wiry, watch from a distance, clutching long staffs. They speak a language you can't recognize, half musical, half gruff, but their curiosity outweighs their caution. The Phoenicians have that effect on people. They come not with swords, but with gifts. Beads of glass, mirrors, woven cloth, and small jars of perfume. Barter begins in the universal language of trade, pointing, smiling, miming. Soon enough, tension melts into laughter. By the 9th century BCE, the Phoenicians had established trading colonies along Spain's southern coast, Gadir, modern Cadiz, being the most famous. These settlements served as bases for mining, trade, and ship repair, allowing the Phoenicians to access Iberia's rich resources of silver, tin, and lead. Archaeologists have found Phoenician pottery, jewelry, and temple remains there, proof of a thriving connection between East and West. As you follow the traders inland, the air thickens with the smell of pine and dust. The land slopes gently upward into low hills streaked with dark veins of ore. At a nearby encampment, you watch as local miners chip at the rock face with bronze tools, their hands stained black with soot and metal dust. A Phoenician merchant oversees the scene, weighing chunks of silver on a small balance scale. He nods approvingly and hands over amphorae filled with olive oil and fine linen. The deal seems simple, silver for goods. But what the Phoenicians truly sell is connection. Their ships can carry Iberian metal across the entire known world, turning distant mountains into currency, distant people into partners. You follow the miners down a narrow tunnel where the air smells of wet stone. Lamps flicker, throwing shadows that dance on the walls. The light glints off streaks of metal embedded in the rock, thin, glimmering threads that catch your eye like frozen lightning. One miner grins and says something that roughly translates to, "The earth here weeps money." You smile, though the thought of the earth weeping anything feels a bit ominous. Outside, the Phoenicians have set up temporary workshops. You watch glassmakers shape molten material into small beads that gleam like drops of captured sunlight. Nearby, carpenters repair ship planks using cedar resin from the east. The smell of it mingles with the metallic tang of the mines, a strange blend of nature and craft. Ancient writers claimed that the Phoenicians used trained donkeys to sniff out veins of silver, believing the animals were drawn to the scent of minerals. It's likely nonsense, but you can imagine the scene. Merchants watching patiently as a group of confused donkeys wander the hills, deciding where to dig. Still, given how successful they were, maybe it worked more often than anyone admits. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians exploited or integrated with the local tribes. Some evidence suggests they built long-term partnerships, intermarrying, sharing technologies, and establishing mixed communities. Others argue they acted more like monopolists, controlling trade routes and pricing to maintain their advantage. Either way, they changed Iberia forever. By evening, you find yourself overlooking the coast again. Below, the bay shimmers in the fading light, filled with anchored ships. Smoke rises from the small settlement near the shore, a mix of cooking fires and smelting furnaces. The sound of hammers drifts faintly upward. You can feel the pulse of industry in the air, the same quiet rhythm that beats in every Phoenician port. A group of sailors gather near a fire, sharing food and stories. One holds up a nugget of silver, freshly smelted, and lets it catch the firelight. "Worth 1,000 jars of oil," he says proudly. Another shakes his head. "Or one storm in the wrong season." They laugh because they know both are true. As darkness falls, the stars spread overhead like scattered coins. You sit by the shore, the sand cool beneath your hands. The water glows faintly with bioluminescence again, tiny green sparks shimmering along the waves. Somewhere out there, beyond the darkness, lies the Pillars of Heracles, what you'd call the Strait of Gibraltar. the edge of the known world. The Phoenicians will reach it soon enough. You can imagine them standing there centuries ago, staring westward into the endless Atlantic. To most people, that horizon meant the end. But to the Phoenicians, it was simply the next trade route waiting to be drawn. Their courage wasn't loud or heroic, it was quiet, methodical, almost routine. The same mindset that measures the weight of silver also measures the distance to new opportunity. The waves lap gently against the shore. You can hear laughter from the camp, the soft thump of drums, and the sizzle of meat roasting over fire. The night smells of salt, metal, and pine smoke, a strangely comforting mix. You close your eyes, letting the sounds of the ancient harbor wash over you. The murmurs of sailors, the crackle of flames, the slow breath of the sea. As you drift into a calm haze, you realize the Phoenicians didn't just map the world, they stitched it together. Every harbor, every colony, every trade was a thread. And tonight, as the tide rises and the stars shimmer, you're sitting right where one of those threads met the edge of the map. Tomorrow, the ships will sail again, past Gibraltar, into waters no one yet understands. But for now, everything is still. The fire crackles, the sea whispers, and the world feels newly made. The next morning, you're back at sea, the ship rocking gently beneath a pale sky streaked with pink. The air tastes of salt and wood smoke, and the sails, dyed that famous Phoenician purple, billow lazily in the wind. You've traveled so far west that home feels like a rumor, but news and politics travel faster than any merchant galley. Even here, surrounded by gulls and sunlight, you hear whispers of kings, wars, and rising powers that threaten to change the balance of every port you've known. The Phoenicians have never been conquerors in the traditional sense. They've thrived by slipping between empires, like water between stones, always finding the cracks and channels others overlook. You can picture it clearly. While Assyrian armies march inland and Egyptian pharaohs carve their names into granite, Phoenician traders glide quietly along the coasts, carrying messages, metals, and ideas. They aren't the ones wielding spears, but they supply the bronze that makes those spears shine. Still, neutrality is a fragile thing. You can't trade with everyone forever without making someone angry. During the 9th to 7th centuries BCE, the Phoenician cities, especially Tyre and Sidon, were caught between powerful neighbors like Assyria, Babylon, and Egypt. These empires demanded tribute, timber, and ships, often treating the coastal cities as useful but expendable assets. At various times, Tyre was besieged, taxed, or coerced into supplying naval support for imperial campaigns. And yet somehow, the Phoenicians survived it all, adapting like reeds bending under wind. You walk the deck as the ship heads east again, toward familiar waters. The crew is quiet today, partly from fatigue, partly from worry. Rumors have reached them. The Assyrians are expanding again, pushing closer to the Levant. The merchants murmur about new taxes, new rulers, and old debts. Empires rise and fall, says the captain with a weary shrug, but cedar still floats. You can't argue with that logic. In the harbors of Tyre, things look both prosperous and tense. The market buzzes with trade, Egyptian gold jewelry glitters beside Iberian silver ingots. But soldiers linger near the gates, their bronze armor gleaming in the sun. You watch as scribes unroll tablets covered in cuneiform script, tallying shipments for the Assyrian king. Somewhere nearby, a priest offers incense to Melkart, hoping the god of the city will keep Tyre standing another year. There's something fascinating about how these merchants navigate danger with grace. They don't fight the tide, they bargain with it. When the Assyrians demand tribute, the Phoenicians send fleets loaded with wood and textiles. When Egypt grows jealous, they send diplomats with gifts and stories. And when the Greeks start appearing on the western horizon, building their own colonies and competing for trade, the Phoenicians simply sail farther. Historians still argue whether this was genius diplomacy or desperate survival. Some say the Phoenicians mastered neutrality, keeping empires at bay through sheer economic importance. Others argue they were opportunists, turning loyalty into a commodity, selling cooperation to the highest bidder. But maybe the truth sits somewhere in between. Not cowardice, not cunning, just the quiet instinct to endure.
You wander through Tyre's inner harbor as evening falls. The air smells of tar and olive oil, and the water glows orange with the reflection of hundreds of lamps. Dock workers haul ropes over their shoulders, voices echoing off the stone quays. Farther down, a merchant from Sidon argues with a Babylonian agent about the price of glass. You catch snatches of words: shipment, tribute, late delivery, the universal sounds of bureaucracy.
And then, near a stack of amphorae, you notice a small group of men sketching on clay tablets. They're drawing maps, not the mystical kind with sea monsters and dragons, but practical outlines of coastlines, harbors, and currents. The Phoenicians may not have invented navigation, but they perfected it. Their trade routes form a living network, a web of relationships and risks. They know where every empire begins and ends, where the winds shift, where the taxes are lowest. A quirky tidbit, some ancient sailors believed that Phoenician captains carried tiny wooden idols that could smell gold or silver. They'd hang these on the mast during voyages, claiming that the figure's nose would point toward profit. Of course, it was really just clever seamanship and an unkindly sense of geography, but it's easy to imagine sailors whispering to their little mascots for luck when the waves grew rough. As the weeks pass, you travel between ports: Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad, each one humming with its own rhythm of trade and diplomacy. You hear of Sidon striking a deal with Egypt, Tyre paying tribute to Assyria, and smaller towns trying to stay unnoticed. In one harbor, you meet an old trader who's seen it all. His beard is white, his hands ink-stained from ledgers. He laughs when you ask how the Phoenicians managed to stay alive between such giants. "It's simple," he says. "Empires need what we sell. They can conquer land, but not the sea. The sea belongs to those who can read its moods." He winks, then turns back to his crates. His words linger with you as you set sail again. The night sky above is wide and full of stars, the same constellation sailors have followed for centuries. The waves murmur softly against the hull. You can almost feel the balance of power shifting invisibly beneath the surface, like underwater currents that tug at your course whether you notice or not. Far to the east, Assyria burns bright and cruel, its kings carving their victories into stone. Far to the west, new Greek cities rise on the same coasts the Phoenicians once ruled alone. You're floating in between, a witness to history's middle ground, where survival depends not on strength, but flexibility. Another day, another port. The smell of cedar follows you everywhere, mingling with fish and incense. You trade in scrolls, spices, and stories. You hear of Carthage growing stronger, perhaps even more independent than Tyre intended. Some call it rebellion, others call it destiny. You sip watered wine on the deck and think that maybe, for the Phoenicians, every colony was a kind of insurance policy, one more safe harbor in a dangerous world. The sky turns red at sunset, the color of molten copper. The captain hums a low tune, steady as the tide. You realize that, for all their troubles, the Phoenicians have built something remarkable, a civilization without borders, defined not by walls or kings, but by motion. Their loyalty isn't to land, it's to connection. The sea darkens, and lamps flicker to life across the deck. You wrap your cloak tighter, the fabric still faintly smelling of Tyrian dye. Around you, sailors speak in a dozen accents, each voice blending into the others. The ship creaks softly, rocking in rhythm with the waves. In the distance, thunder murmurs, a storm brewing somewhere beyond sight. Empires rise like that storm, sudden, powerful, and loud. But storms pass, the sea remains. And so do the Phoenicians, adjusting their sails, whispering to their gods, and continuing westward as they always have. The morning breaks gently, painting the water with thin streaks of rose and gold. You rise to the creak of the ship and the faint scent of salt and cedar, a combination that now feels like home. The horizon stretches endlessly, blue turning to silver in the early light, and the soft slap of waves against the hull becomes a rhythmic companion. The wind fills the sail, a steady, invisible hand guiding you westward once more. The Phoenicians were masters of the sea because they understood it in ways others only guessed at. Not just the currents, the tides, or the waves, but the patterns of wind, the whisper of the heavens themselves. They had an uncanny sense of direction, even on cloudless nights when the stars were hidden. You can imagine them reading the subtle shifts in the breeze, adjusting the sails, noting how a gull's flight could hint at nearby land, or how the color of the water might signal a change in depth. You trace the ship's progress along the Mediterranean as the crew works in quiet harmony. One sailor checks the mast, another smooths the sail, and a third hums an old tune that echoes softly across the waves. The captain, eyes fixed on the horizon, occasionally calls out instructions in Phoenician, each command precise yet gentle, a cadence learned from generations at sea. You notice the way the ship seems to respond almost sentiently, leaning into the wind, cutting through the water with ease. The Phoenicians are credited with pioneering advanced navigation techniques in the Mediterranean. They observed celestial patterns, coastal landmarks, and seasonal winds, enabling them to sail farther and more reliably than almost any other civilization of their time. Some scholars even suggest that they may have circumnavigated Africa long before later explorers, though evidence remains debated. As you glide west, the sea begins to hum with life. Schools of fish dart beneath the surface, their silvery bodies catching the sunlight. Dolphins leap alongside the hull, skimming the waves with effortless grace. You lean over the rail, letting the spray mist your face. It's mesmerizing and calming, a reminder that the Phoenicians' world was not just maps and commerce. It was water, wind, and living creatures moving in unison. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians relied more on experience and instinct or formalized tools like the sounding line, lead weights, and rudimentary charts. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, in a combination of tradition, observation, and inherited knowledge. You imagine a young sailor learning the art of navigation, feeling both terrified and exhilarated as the first stars appear overhead. The wind shifts slightly in the afternoon, bringing a warm, dry breath from the north. The crew adjusts the sails with practiced hands. You feel the subtle pull of currents beneath the keel, the ship responding almost organically, leaning into the rhythm of the Mediterranean like a dancer guided by music no one else can hear. The captain explains, quietly, that each leg of a journey is as much about patience as it is about skill. Haste only invites trouble. You watch the patterns of clouds as the sun climbs higher. Cirrus streaks signal fair weather, while denser cumulus clouds hint at showers near distant shores. The Phoenicians claimed to read the sky like a book, and standing here, with wind in your hair and salt on your lips, you understand what they meant. Every puff of wind, every ripple in the water, every movement of the birds carries information if you know how to listen. A quirky tidbit, some ancient sailors believed the Phoenician captains could predict storms by listening to the song of the waves. They claimed the water hummed differently before a gale, a subtle vibration that only trained ears could detect. It might be folklore, but as you watch the waves shift and swirl, you can't help but feel there's some truth to the idea. The sea does speak, and those who know how to listen have a profound advantage. As night approaches, the stars begin their slow dance across the sky. Orion rises in the east, his belt shining like a polished gem. Polaris, steadfast in the north, serves as a compass. The sailors point out constellations, mixing stories of gods, heroes, and the sea. One whispers that Melkart himself rides with them, guiding the fleet. You smile at the notion, imagining a bronze god steering the bow, though it's hard to tell whether the sailor believes it or merely enjoys the poetry. You help the crew haul water and prepare the evening meal: lentils, bread, and a few dried figs. The smell of roasted fish wafts across the deck, mingling with cedar and salt. You eat slowly, watching the stars reflect on the undulating water. It feels like the world is suspended between moments, every detail amplified in the quiet. Historians still debate how much of the Phoenician navigation knowledge was shared openly versus kept secret. Some evidence suggests captains passed down techniques only to apprentices, maintaining a competitive edge over rival traders. Others argue that knowledge spread naturally through trade, and that every harbor became a classroom in its own right. Either way, the Mediterranean was a schoolroom, and the sea itself the teacher. A breeze carries the scent of distant pine, perhaps from Corsica or Sardinia, hinting at land yet unseen. The sailors murmur about upcoming stops, ports of supply, and the ever-important replenishment of fresh water. Each decision is a careful balance: how far to push the ship, when to pause, and which coastlines offer the best safety and trade. Every choice weighs heavily, because miscalculations here could mean days lost, cargo spoiled, or worse, being stranded at sea. You lie back on the deck, letting the gentle sway lull you into reflection. The wind, the stars, the smell of wood and salt, all of it merges into a slow, calming rhythm. The Phoenicians have spent centuries mastering this dance. Their lives are a negotiation with the natural world, a constant listening, adjusting, and moving. You realize the wind isn't just a tool, it's a partner, and every sailor learns to respect its mood. The moon rises, casting a silver path across the waves. The ship rocks softly in response, carrying you farther west toward unknown coasts and untold riches. The crew settles into quiet conversation or rest, their voices low, almost reverent. Even in the vastness of the Mediterranean, there's a sense of shared purpose, of rhythm and patience cultivated over generations. By midnight, the ship glides along a path almost imperceptible, guided by instinct, stars, and centuries of tradition. You close your eyes and let the wind wash over you, the soft creak of the hull and whisper of the waves easing your thoughts. The Phoenicians, you think, have done this countless times, pushing west, building empires of commerce, and stitching the Mediterranean together with threadbare sails and unwavering persistence. And as the night deepens, the stars above shimmer like scattered treasure, each one a silent witness to their journeys. The wind carries them, the waves embrace them, and you, somewhere in the middle, float along, a quiet observer of skill, patience, and the enduring whisper of the ancient seas. The sun rises slowly over the horizon, brushing the water with pale gold, and the ship rocks gently beneath your feet. You're farther west now, past the familiar contours of Spain's southern coasts, heading toward the rich mineral lands that the Phoenicians have sought for generations. The air smells faintly metallic, mixed with cedar and the tang of salt, and even the soft slap of the waves seems purposeful, guiding you toward the resources that make empires flourish. You lean against the rail and watch the shoreline approach. Rugged hills dotted with scrub and pale rocks, valleys hidden between them like secret pockets waiting to be discovered. The Phoenicians, masters of maritime trade, know this region well. They come here not for grain or wine, but for tin and copper, metals as vital as the cedar they export. Tin strengthens bronze, the alloy that equips armies and builds tools. Copper powers both craft and ceremony. Without these metals, much of the ancient Mediterranean would grind to a halt. A mainstream historical fact, Phoenician traders regularly sailed to Iberia, Sardinia, and even Britain in search of tin and copper between the 9th and 6th centuries BCE. They established small ports and trading posts to access mines and river deposits, forming the backbone of Europe's early metal supply chain. Archaeologists still find remnants of Phoenician amphorae and workshops near these mines, marking centuries of continuous exchange. Your small landing party rows ashore into a narrow cove. The rocks are reddish, flecked with darker veins, and a faint shimmer catches your eye. Mineral deposits that promise wealth beneath the surface. Local miners work patiently, their bronze tools chipping away at stone, while Phoenician overseers measure and weigh every fragment. The merchants exchange olive oil, fabric, and beads for raw ore. It's an elegant system of reciprocity, honed over centuries, a language of commerce as precise as any dialect. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians controlled these mines directly or worked through local intermediaries. Some evidence suggests small colonies oversaw mining operations, while other findings indicate a network of partnerships with indigenous communities. Either way, the result was the same: a steady flow of metals westward into the Mediterranean. Sailors claimed that certain cliffs along these coasts sang when the wind blew through mineral-rich caves, a sort of natural resonance that could guide miners to the richest veins. Likely superstition, but standing there and hearing the wind whistle through jagged rocks, you can almost imagine a hidden melody embedded in the earth itself. You watch the Phoenician miners carefully sort ore, running hands along copper seams and tossing chunks of tin into woven baskets. Everything is measured meticulously, weighed, and documented on clay tablets. Even here, thousands of miles from Tyre or Sidon, the scribes ensure that every transaction is accounted for. You note how the same methods that track cedar and wine are applied to metal, evidence that trade is more than movement, it's organization and knowledge. The coastline stretches farther north and west, revealing dense forests and faint rivers threading through valleys. The crew jokes about navigating these rivers in small boats, carrying metal upriver to larger ships. You watch young sailors laugh and play along the beach, tossing small nuggets of copper at each other, their voices mixing with the calls of gulls overhead. It's hard to imagine these same metals will one day furnish weapons and tools far across the Mediterranean, yet here they are, still part of the land and water. By mid-afternoon, you follow a caravan inland, carrying heavy baskets on pack animals. The path winds between steep hills, the sunlight glinting off copper seams in the rocks. Locals carry tin ingots with care, laughing when they notice the newcomers watching. The Phoenicians trade glass beads and colorful textiles for every pound, the transaction both simple and ingenious. They're skilled in the art of perceived value. The locals leave satisfied, and the merchants secure wealth that travels oceans. Some legends claim that Phoenician miners carried small carved figurines of Melkart into mines, believing the god could protect them from cave-ins. You see the faint traces of these talismans among the stones, tiny carved shapes tucked in pockets or hung on ropes. Superstition or ritual, it reinforces the constant blend of practicality and belief that governs the Phoenician approach. As the sun begins to lower, the day grows warmer and shadows stretch across the hills. You pause to watch a group of miners chanting a slow, rhythmic song while working copper veins. The sound is hypnotic, echoing off rocks and merging with the soft hiss of the breeze. You realize that trade and labor, effort and rhythm combine to create something larger than themselves, a network of human connection powered by earth and sea. Historians still debate whether Phoenician influence in the West was primarily economic or also cultural. There's evidence that their presence affected local technology, religious practices, and even writing systems. By spreading tools, knowledge, and ritual, they left imprints far beyond the mines themselves. Every piece of tin and copper carries not just value, but also influence. As dusk falls, you make your way back to the ship. The waves are calm, shimmering silver in the dying light. Sailors prepare for the evening meal: bread, olives, figs, and a bit of salted fish. The air is heavy with the scent of the day's labor, mingled with pine smoke from distant forests and salt from the water. You sit quietly, reflecting on the journey. The metals mined by hand, the intricate exchange of goods, and the quiet intelligence of the Phoenicians who could turn a rocky cove into a hub of global commerce. Night drapes across the sky. Stars flicker in reflection on the water, each one like a small beacon guiding your journey west. Somewhere ahead lies new territory, islands yet unseen, harbors uncharted, waiting for the Phoenicians to bring cedar, glass, and knowledge. The hum of the ship beneath you, the rhythmic slap of water, and the faint scent of minerals on the breeze lull you into a soft calm. The trade routes stretch endlessly, a thread connecting lands, peoples, and stories. You realize that tin and copper, those simple materials, embody the essence of Phoenician life: movement, connection, and the ability to read the world with patience, intelligence, and subtle cunning. Every nugget carries history, every amphora bears culture, and every wave supports a civilization that thrives in motion. As you lie on the deck, the moon rising overhead, you feel the quiet assurance that this network of trade, of tin, copper, cedar, and ideas will endure. The wind sighs softly through the rigging, and the ship rocks gently, carrying you deeper into the heart of a world stitched together by Phoenician hands. The horizon shimmers pale gold as dawn stretches across the Mediterranean. You rise from the deck, letting the gentle sway of the ship lull you into awareness. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of salt, cedar, and something faintly herbal from the distant coasts. You sense the subtle hum of the sea beneath you, like a heartbeat, steady and reassuring. The Phoenicians are on the move once again, tracing ancient trade routes, but today there is a new rhythm. The rhythm of contact, diplomacy, and cautious curiosity, because ahead lie the islands and ports where Greek traders have begun to stake their own claims. You remember the stories of Greeks sprouting like scattered olive trees, their small harbors buzzing with merchants and artisans. For centuries, the Phoenicians had dominated trade in the eastern Mediterranean. They brought cedar, glass, and metals to far-off lands, moving goods in waves as constant as the tides. But now, you are approaching islands dotted with settlements that are foreign, yet familiar. Echoes of your own civilization, yet tinged with difference. Phoenician traders frequently interacted with Greek city-states from as early as the 9th century BCE. They exchanged commodities like timber, metals, and textiles for Greek pottery, olive oil, and local crafts. These interactions were mutually beneficial, but they also carried rivalry, as Greek merchants increasingly sought control of the same routes that had sustained Phoenician dominance for centuries. As the ship nears the Cyclades, the sea grows busier. Small Greek triremes dart between islands, their sails white as milk, hulls painted dark, and oars cutting rhythmically through water. From a distance, you can hear the clatter of tools, the shouts of dock workers, and the faint bray of animals. The Phoenician crew glances at each other knowingly. These encounters can be rewarding, but they are always tinged with caution. The Greeks are traders, yes, but also ambitious, curious, and competitive. You row ashore with a small group to meet local Greek merchants. The market is alive with the scent of fresh bread, olive oil, and the metallic tang of coins. Stalls are piled with amphorae painted in vibrant reds and blacks, depicting mythological scenes and heroic tales. Merchants wave, trade, haggle, and laugh, welcoming Phoenician goods and exchanging information about distant ports. There is an ease to the commerce, yet an undercurrent of tension. Every exchange carries the potential for future competition. Some Greeks believed that Phoenician sailors carried tiny charms made from cedar and glass beads that could catch the wind and ensure safe passage. The Phoenicians themselves likely considered these little talismans playful superstition, but the effect was practical. They inspired confidence among inexperienced sailors who followed them. You notice a young Greek boy mimicking the gesture, dangling a small bead from a string as he runs across the market, convinced it will help his father's ship find favorable winds. Historians still argue about the extent to which Phoenicians influenced Greek culture versus adopting Greek innovations themselves. Some suggest that the Greeks borrowed the alphabet, maritime techniques, and artistic motifs from Phoenician traders. Others contend that the Phoenicians learned from the Greeks as well, integrating elements of their pottery styles and navigational innovations. Whatever the case, these encounters were a slow, mutual shaping of civilizations. You watch as negotiations unfold. A Phoenician merchant offers cedar logs in exchange for jars of olive oil, pointing to the grain-laden amphorae nearby. A Greek counteroffer includes pottery and embroidered textiles, the kind of luxurious goods that Phoenicians would transport east. It's a dance, polite, precise, with a rhythm older than any of the words exchanged. You notice the subtle signs: a raised eyebrow, a shift in posture, a hand hovering over a coin, each move a calculated gesture meant to assert value without offense. The harbor itself is alive. Fishermen haul nets heavy with mackerel, children chase stray goats between stalls, and the smell of smoked fish mingles with baked bread. Meanwhile, small boats ferry goods to larger triremes anchored in deeper water. You can see the Phoenicians observing every detail, noting which Greek cities are thriving, which are struggling, and which islands may offer future opportunities for trade or competition. By the 8th century BCE, the Phoenicians had established trading posts on some Aegean islands, creating a complex network that allowed them to navigate Greek territories without direct conflict. Their ships were faster, lighter, and more maneuverable than most, giving them an advantage in both commerce and evasion. As the day stretches, the crew returns to the ship. You sit on deck, listening to the gentle slap of waves against the hull, and watching the Greeks continue their labor. Small boats ferry pottery, wine, and oil back and forth, their sails flicking like pale flags in the afternoon sun. The Phoenicians prepare to sail west again, their cargo holds full, their minds cataloging every port, every trade, every alliance. Some sailors jokingly claimed that Greek merchants had a secret market song they hummed to attract buyers, though no one ever actually heard it. Still, it became a running joke on Phoenician ships, a reminder that trade was as much about perception as it was about goods. You chuckle quietly, imagining the captain rolling his eyes at the crew's endless speculation. As night falls, the islands recede into shadow. Lanterns flicker in distant villages, their reflections dancing on water like scattered coins. The Phoenician crew settles into a calm routine, preparing ropes, checking sails, and sharing small meals of bread, figs, and dried fish. The sky above is studded with stars, constellations that have guided these sailors for generations. Historians still debate whether early Phoenician-Greek trade led directly to colonization or simply to cultural exchange. Some argue that Phoenician settlements on Greek islands facilitated later Greek expansion into the West. Others suggest that mutual observation rather than formal colonization was the primary outcome. Either way, you realize that each encounter, no matter how brief, leaves a lasting imprint on maps, markets, and minds. Lying on deck, the wind in your hair and the faint scent of cedar clinging to your clothes, you reflect on the balance of caution and curiosity that defines these journeys. The Phoenicians are observers, negotiators, and adventurers, moving fluidly between worlds. They respect the strength of others, anticipate competition, and leave their mark without force. The waves carry you onward. Somewhere ahead, islands and harbors await, some known, some yet undiscovered. You realize the Mediterranean is a living network, a constant negotiation of wind, water, and human ambition. The Phoenicians are the quiet custodians of this web, weaving connection, commerce, and culture into every port they touch. As the stars deepen and the night grows still, you settle against the railing, letting the gentle sway of the ship lull you towards sleep. Lanterns glimmer faintly across the water, waves hum against the hull, and the knowledge that trade, knowledge, and connection will continue long after you close your eyes brings a comforting sense of rhythm to the world. The morning is soft, mist hovering over the water like a veil. You step onto the deck, inhaling the briny air mixed with cedar and the faint scent of seaweed. The ship rocks gently beneath you, almost imperceptibly, as if the waves themselves are cradling you forward. Ahead lies the Atlantic, the mysterious edge of the known world for many sailors, but for the Phoenicians, a new chapter in their relentless pursuit of trade and discovery. You remember the stories passed down among the crew? Tales of westward journeys where the water darkens, where winds shift in strange patterns, and where currents can carry you far from familiar coastlines. The Phoenicians were among the first to push these limits, guided by experience, stars, and an unspoken trust in the sea. Every voyage westward carries both risk and opportunity, but they are patient navigators, adept at reading the subtle signs the ocean offers. Classical sources like Herodotus and later Roman historians suggest that Phoenician sailors may have circumnavigated Africa under the reign of Pharaoh Necho II around the 6th century BCE. While scholars still debate the accuracy of this claim, it illustrates the extraordinary range and ambition of Phoenician maritime enterprise. These voyages were not reckless adventures, they were calculated expeditions, blending knowledge, observation, and courage. As the coastline of Iberia disappears behind you, the waters grow deeper, darker, and wilder. Seabirds wheel overhead, crying sharply, and dolphins leap alongside the hull, keeping pace with effortless grace. The wind shifts unpredictably, and the ship responds instinctively as the crew adjusts sails and rudder. You realize that navigation here is not merely a skill, it is an art form, a dance between human intuition and natural forces. You follow the Phoenician crew as they measure currents with lead lines, check the stars, and monitor the wind. Each observation is carefully noted in wax tablets, forming a record that will guide future journeys. This meticulous attention to detail distinguishes Phoenician sailors from many others. They transform the unknown into the navigable, turning mystery into commerce. Historians still argue whether Phoenician expeditions ever reached the British Isles to acquire tin directly or relied on intermediary traders along the Atlantic coast. Some archaeological evidence suggests direct contact, such as Phoenician artifacts found far from the Mediterranean, while other findings point to a complex network of trade involving local intermediaries. Either way, their reach is undeniable. A quirky tidbit, sailors occasionally believed that the Western Sea held whale islands, enormous creatures mistaken for land when viewed from afar. You can almost picture the shock and awe of first encountering a pod of whales breaking the surface, their massive backs cresting like moving hills, mist rising in clouds with every breath. It must have felt like meeting a living mountain in the middle of nowhere. The sun climbs higher, warming the deck and glinting off the water. You watch the Phoenicians work in quiet rhythm. Some adjust sails, others check lines, and a few squat on the deck, sketching the coastline and noting subtle changes in watercolor. Every observation informs the next voyage. Every mark on a tablet, a guidepost for future navigators. The Atlantic is vast and unpredictable, but they treat it as both partner and teacher. By midday, the scent of distant land teases the senses. You notice a faint tang of pine and sand in the wind, a hint that islands or capes lie beyond the mist. The crew murmurs with anticipation, perhaps an uncharted harbor, perhaps a familiar point marked by earlier voyages. You realize the Phoenician success depends not only on courage, but also on careful attention. They cannot afford to miss a single clue, a single indicator of safe passage or valuable trade. Phoenician settlements in the western Mediterranean, such as Gadir, Cadiz, and colonies along the southern coast of Iberia, functioned as bases for accessing tin, silver, and other resources from the Atlantic fringes. These outposts allowed traders to establish networks stretching from the Levant to the far west, connecting multiple cultures and economies. The waves shift under the late afternoon sun, glowing green in shallow currents, and deepening to sapphire in open waters. You watch a small pod of dolphins glide beneath the hull, turning, leaping, and playing in a display of effortless energy. Their presence is both calming and exhilarating, a reminder of the vitality of the ocean and the delicate balance between human endeavor and nature's vastness. Historians still debate the extent of Phoenician knowledge of Atlantic currents. Some argue that they discovered seasonal wind patterns, tidal movements, and even upwelling zones rich in fish, giving them a competitive edge over less experienced traders. Others maintain that much of their navigation relied on coastal hugging and trial and error, particularly in regions far from established colonies. Either way, their successes testify to extraordinary adaptability. A quirky tidbit legend held that certain Atlantic winds carried whispers from unknown lands, messages from gods or spirits meant to guide daring sailors. You can almost imagine a Phoenician leaning over the railing at night, listening for faint murmurs in the gusts, nodding solemnly and adjusting the sails accordingly. Whether truth or superstition, it adds poetry to every voyage. By evening, the sun sinks low, painting the water in molten gold and copper hues. The crew settles into quiet routines, checking ropes, adjusting lines, and preparing a simple meal of bread, dried fish, and olives. The gentle sway of the ship, the distant cry of seabirds, and the soft lap of waves against the hull create a hypnotic rhythm. You lean against the railing, letting the world narrow to the sound of the ocean and the soft scent of salt and cedar. The Atlantic is vast, limitless in its possibilities and dangers, but it is also alive with trade, connection, and discovery. Every voyage westward is a careful negotiation with the unknown, a test of skill, patience, and observation. The Phoenicians moved deliberately, leaving small markers in their wake, tales of safe harbors, sketches of coastlines, and the steady pulse of commerce. As darkness falls, stars emerge one by one, reflecting on the water like scattered gemstones. The crew rests, but the ship continues its measured journey, guided by the wind, the waves, and the accumulated knowledge of generations. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the gentle rocking and whisper of the sea lull you into quiet reflection. The Atlantic stretches endlessly before you, a liquid frontier of opportunity and challenge. The Phoenicians, with their patience, skill, and quiet audacity, continue to navigate it, linking lands, peoples, and economies. And in this vast, dark expanse, you feel the pulse of history itself, steady and unrelenting, carrying you toward the next adventure beyond the edge of the known world. The first light of dawn brushes softly against the horizon as your ship glides along calm waters. The scent of salt and cedar mingles with the faint aroma of baked bread, and the gentle sway of the vessel lulls you into a quiet rhythm. Ahead lies the fertile coast of North Africa, the cradle of a new chapter in Phoenician history. Carthage, a city rising from modest beginnings to become the jewel of Western Phoenician influence. You can almost feel the hum of bustling markets, the clatter of merchants' voices, and the steady pulse of a city built for trade, resilience, and connection. You step onto the deck, the early sunlight warming your shoulders, and look toward the coast. Low hills stretch inland, olive groves dotted with wildflowers, while closer to the water, nascent harbors reflect the orange glow of morning. The Phoenicians have always been migratory, yet they establish roots strategically, planting colonies in spots rich with opportunity and safe harbors. Carthage is one such place, perfectly positioned to control the Western Mediterranean and serve as a hub for trade networks reaching Iberia, Sardinia, and beyond. Carthage was founded by settlers from Tyre around the 9th century BCE, eventually becoming the most influential Phoenician colony in the Western Mediterranean. Its harbors, fortified walls, and strategic location enabled it to thrive economically and militarily, serving as a base for commerce, mining expeditions, and even cultural exchange. Carthage's growth was gradual but relentless, a testament to Phoenician foresight and maritime skill. Amphorae of wine, olive oil, jars of perfume, and intricately woven textiles. Merchants haggle over prices with practiced gestures, laughter rising above the gentle lap of waves. You observe scribes recording transactions on clay tablets, carefully noting weights, measurements, and names. The meticulousness of trade here is astonishing. Every amphora, every ingot, every cedar plank is accounted for with exacting care. Historians still argue about the nature of Phoenician influence in the Western Mediterranean. Was it primarily commercial, or did it extend into cultural assimilation? Archaeological evidence shows both. Carthage and other colonies absorbed local customs while introducing Phoenician architecture, religion, and crafts. Temples to Melkart, small shrines, and workshops suggest a blend of adaptation and continuity, creating a cultural fusion that extended well beyond commerce. A quirky tidbit that the founders of Carthage performed a symbolic ritual involving a small boat set adrift in the sea, laden with herbs and coins to invite prosperity from the Atlantic winds. While likely ceremonial rather than magical, it demonstrates the blend of pragmatism and ritual that guided Phoenician expansion, an acknowledgement that the sea was both a highway and a living force. You wander along the shoreline, noting the rhythm of activity. Carpenters repair small vessels, fishmongers haggle over the morning catch, and artisans sculpt small statues for trade. The smell of pine resin, mixed with the tang of salted fish and the faint perfume of imported goods, fills the air. You realize that colonies like Carthage were not just outposts, they were living, breathing cities, hubs of commerce, culture, and innovation. The crew prepares to unload the latest shipment of tin, copper, and Iberian silver. Pack animals trudge slowly up ramps from the shore to storage areas, each step calculated and precise. Merchants from distant lands have already arrived, their sails dotting the horizon like bright confetti against the morning light. You feel the subtle energy of a city alive with commerce, the pulse of connections stretching thousands of miles. Some sailors claimed that the harbor of Carthage was so well designed that dolphins would occasionally swim alongside incoming ships, guiding them safely in. Whether true or not, it's a charming story that highlights how closely Phoenicians observed their environment, interpreting even animal behavior as part of maritime intelligence. Historians still argue whether Carthage's rise contributed more to economic dominance or strategic military control in the Western Mediterranean. Its fortifications, naval innovations, and strategic alliances allowed it to exert influence far beyond its walls. You can see why the Phoenicians invested so heavily in these colonies. Each one was a node in a vast network, extending the reach of their trade and knowledge. As evening falls, the activity slows. Lanterns flicker along the quay, their reflections shimmering across gentle waves. The smell of evening fires mixes with the cool, salty breeze. You walk along the docks, observing merchants finishing accounts, sailors tending to rigging, and children chasing goats through narrow alleyways. The city hums with life, vibrant yet composed, a testament to centuries of careful planning and quiet diligence. From your vantage point, you can see the Phoenician colonies stretching outward. Small trading posts along the North African coast, islands dotted with settlements, and the faint outline of Iberian ports to the west. Each represents not just trade, but a web of influence, connection, and survival. The Phoenicians do not merely move goods, they cultivate networks, friendships, and alliances, ensuring that even distant places are tied to a shared rhythm of commerce. By nightfall, the stars glimmer overhead, mirrored by lanterns on the quays. You lean against the railing, feeling the gentle sway of the ship beneath you. Somewhere out there, across the western Mediterranean, lies the promise of new markets, metals, and stories waiting to be told. Carthage stands as both a culmination and a springboard, a thriving, vibrant hub where the skill, foresight, and quiet determination of the Phoenicians converge. You close your eyes briefly, listening to the soft lapping of water, the murmurs of the harbor, and the distant cries of seabirds settling for the night. It is a moment of calm reflection, a pause in the ongoing rhythm of trade, discovery, and cultural exchange. You realize that the legacy of Carthage and the Western colonies is not just in wealth or influence, but in the enduring capacity to connect, adapt, and thrive across the vastness of the Mediterranean world. The day begins softly, the sun barely cresting the horizon, spreading a pale light across the gentle swell of the Mediterranean. You rise from the deck, stretching against the calm motion of the ship, inhaling the familiar mingling scents of salt, cedar, and faint olive oil. Everything feels deliberate, measured, yet infinite. The waves, the wind, and the long ribbon of trade routes stretching in all directions like veins carrying life to the farthest reaches of the ancient world. You consider the enormity of what the Phoenicians accomplished. Cities like Tyre and Sidon, ports along Iberia and North Africa, and colonies scattered across islands all functioned not merely as hubs for commerce, but as conduits of culture, knowledge, and connection. The cedar logs, metal ingots, glass beads, and dyed textiles they carried were more than goods. They were messages in motion, whispers of civilizations, and tangible evidence of a people who understood the value of linking worlds. Phoenician trade networks extended from the Levant across the Mediterranean, reaching as far as modern-day Spain, North Africa, and possibly even the British Isles. They transported metals, timber, wine, oil, and luxury items, establishing a pattern of commerce that influenced countless societies, setting the foundation for future maritime empires. These networks weren't simply about profit. They were a form of diplomacy, survival, and cultural exchange. As you glide along a quiet stretch of sea, the gentle rocking of the ship almost hypnotic, you reflect on the flexibility and ingenuity required for such a vast enterprise. The Phoenicians weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They mastered adaptation. They observed, listened, and responded to the world around them, whether navigating complex political landscapes, reading the subtle cues of the wind and stars, or negotiating with foreign merchants. Every voyage required patience, knowledge, and an almost instinctive understanding of both nature and human behavior. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians' achievements were the product of conscious strategy or the cumulative result of countless small adaptations. Some claim that their meticulous record-keeping, innovative shipbuilding, and colony planning point to deliberate design. Others argue that the vastness and efficiency of their networks were emergent properties, created over centuries of trial, error, and necessity. Perhaps the truth lies in the intersection, careful planning shaped by generations of hands-on experience. A quirky tidbit: Phoenician captains carried tiny carved idols aboard their ships to calm the waters and bring good fortune. In reality, these were simple charms, sometimes little pieces of cedar or colored glass. But to imagine a miniature deity quietly accompanying every journey adds a layer of charm to the daily life of trade. You picture a captain glancing at it during a sudden gust, nodding with reassurance, a quiet ritual that blends superstition with habit.
The influence of Phoenician trade extended beyond commerce. By connecting disparate lands, they spread technology, artistic motifs, and even writing systems. The Greek alphabet, for example, was adapted from Phoenician letters, a subtle yet profound legacy. Every amphora, tablet, and artifact moving along these routes carried more than goods. It carried ideas, innovations, and glimpses of distant cultures. Trade became a medium of education and cultural exchange, not merely economic activity.
As the sun reaches its zenith, the ship drifts in harmony with the current. You note the way the crew works, fluid and unhurried, adjusting sails, checking rigging, and keeping a careful eye on the horizon. It strikes you that this rhythm mirrors the very philosophy of Phoenician commerce: patience, attention, and quiet diligence. Each wave, each gust of wind, each turn of the rudder is part of a larger orchestration, just as each trade route, port, and colony was part of a grand network of influence and survival. You imagine standing in a market in Tyre, Byblos, or Carthage, observing merchants haggling over copper, glass, and textiles. The cacophony of voices, the sense of spices and resin, the clatter of bronze coins, all converge into a living symphony of trade. And yet, beneath the bustle is the calm certainty of a system built on careful observation, trust, and adaptability. It is almost meditative, watching life unfold along these invisible threads of connection. Ancient sailors sometimes joked that the sea had a memory, remembering which ships respected its currents and which tried to force their way. You can imagine a Phoenician captain murmuring to the waves before a long voyage, half in jest, half in belief, acknowledging that survival depended on a respectful partnership with the vast, unpredictable waters. By evening, the sky softens into a wash of pink and violet, stars beginning to emerge along the deepening horizon. Lanterns flicker aboard the ship, their gentle glow mirrored on the water. You reflect on the journey of the Phoenicians, the meticulous recording of trade, the establishment of colonies, the creation of durable networks, and the subtle weaving of culture into commerce. These achievements are quiet, often overlooked, yet profound. They demonstrate that influence is not always about conquest or might. It can be about connectivity, intelligence, and foresight. Historians still debate the ultimate reach of Phoenician trade, especially along the western Atlantic and into northern Europe. Artifacts suggest a surprising spread of influence, but much remains speculative. Regardless of specifics, the legacy is clear. Phoenician networks bridged oceans, peoples, and ideas. Their mark on history is subtle, interwoven into the economic, cultural, and technological threads of subsequent civilizations. As the night deepens, you settle against the railing, the gentle rocking of the ship lulling you into reflection. Lanterns swing softly, waves lap rhythmically, and the scent of cedar lingers in the warm air. You feel the vastness of the network, stretching from the Levant to the far western reaches of the Mediterranean, and the quiet wisdom of those who built it. Every log, every trade, every voyage is a testament to human ingenuity, patience, and adaptability. The final wind down begins, leaving the sky awash in deep indigo. You close your eyes, letting the gentle rocking and distant murmurs of the sea wash over you. The stories, trades, and voyages of the Phoenicians fade into a soft rhythm of thought, each wave a gentle pulse, each star a calm witness to their enduring legacy. The vast web of trade, culture, and knowledge that they wove stretches before you, quiet and infinite. a reminder that some achievements are felt in continuity rather than conquest. So, as you drift in the gentle embrace of the Mediterranean night, know that Phoenician trade routes were more than paths. They were lifelines, connecting worlds and ideas, a quiet, enduring testament to human curiosity and ingenuity. The waves hum their ancient song, the stars whisper their stories, and you are carried softly along with them, toward sleep, toward dreams, toward the calm assurance that the work of connection never truly ends, but flows quietly, endlessly, like the sea itself. End of script. Sweet dreams.